afraid of the dark.
I work as a cell phone technician, and I'm sure you've seen videos on YouTube of guys climbing to the top of metal towers in vast expanses of nothingness. That's me. Where I live, it's the best job I can get without a high school diploma, and the only entertainment I have. As an adrenaline-hungry, eternally screwed-up kid, I was basically a star candidate. All it really takes are two things: basic physical conditioning and a complete lack of fear. And I have those two things, or at least I thought I did 2 weeks ago. The company I work for, which shall remain nameless so that this post is not discovered by company brass, sent me out to a job site about 50 miles out of town. I rarely cross state lines, but the pylons in question were quite a distance away. It was meant to bounce the signal from one sleepy mining town to the next across the Appalachian Mountains. That was good enough for me. I like to work where I'm not prying eyes. It's for base jumping. Base jumping is throwing yourself off something big with a parachute. And when I was 10 years old, I broke my ankle jumping off the roof of my house with a blanket. Or maybe that's just me. Anyway, base jumping is basically the adult version of that, minus the broken ankle and the beating. Luckily, a remote radio tower was the perfect place for this sort of hobby. On the morning I was supposed to leave, there was a fine mist in the valley around where I live. The locals called it moonshine weather. I was tempted to do so, but I had been hoping they would send me out that way for months, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity. I should have trusted my instincts. Instead, I brewed coffee in a shitty thermos and threw my bags in the back of the shitty Jeep. I drove the few hours to the site, fooling myself that the weather would soon improve and that it would be sunny all the way to the summit. I packed my parachute along with my other gear. I had brought my GoPro with me until I realized that it was probably not smart for the OSHA rep to record my aneurysm-inducing activities. Anyway, it's smart when you remember. I parked my Jeep outside the fence around the tower and punched the code into the electronic gate. Someone had strung razor wire over it, but no one would be visiting much and the wire was crumbling in places. My suspicions were confirmed when I drove past the small administration shed in the corner of the property. I admired it as I opened the padlock and removed a light bulb from inside. The work order stated that the tower needed to replace the aircraft warning light. The red light would flash on and off, letting me know that there was a huge tower in the dark. I took it off the dusty shelf and tucked it into my backpack. I put on my climbing gear, checked the chute one last time, and began my ascent. The start of a climb is always boring. One hand on top of the other, climbing step by step. It's like waiting impatiently for the thrill of dangling hundreds of feet in the air. At least I was, but you have to pace yourself. A fall from a height of 30 feet is just as deadly as a fall from 400 feet. Most of the time, tower climbers attach carabiners to each rung and secure themselves as they climb. Unless it was a windy day, I wouldn't worry about that. Not so that day. In fact, the air was unusually quiet as I climbed. If I were a smarter man, I might have paid more attention to the prickle on the back of my neck or the foreboding feeling in my gut. But as you can imagine, I did not. So I didn't. Instead, I decided it was coffee jitters and doubled down on my pace. Maybe I needed to take a leak. Have you ever pissed off a 400-foot tall object? It's almost as awesome as that sounds. About halfway up, I noticed that the fog around me was getting thicker, not thinner. Usually when you get a little higher and the sun starts to burn off the fog, you get a clearer view. Usually by 2 p.m. The fog is almost gone, and it is possible to jump off the top. I had already picked a small meadow southwest of the tower. It would be an easy walk back to the Jeep. But if I couldn't see the tower, that would be a problem. I am not a suicidal person. My dreams seemed shattered today. The fog around me was so thick I thought a storm was coming. But the weather forecast didn't mention the possibility of a storm, and there was still no wind. It was strangely quiet except for the sound of my boots and my own breath in my ears. We took a short break around midway up the mountain. I attached my carabiner to the upper rung for the first time that day, and we had just passed 150 FT. I leaned back, stretched, and enjoyed the sensation of weightlessness. I glanced down, something seasoned climbers tell me never to do. Below me, shrouded in fog, I saw a shape clinging to the side of the tower. I say shape because I could not see the figure clearly. I could only see a shadow perhaps 100 feet below me, and it was so far away that I could not tell if it was moving or not. Now I know it wasn't Shakespeare, but I don't think the old Bill would have reacted the same way I did. Because who would climb a cell phone tower in the Appalachian backcountry on a day like this? It's someone other than me. My first thought was that it might be one of those graffiti artists who knew their skills were limited by the canvas of the old maintenance shed and had the guts to climb the tower and add some color to the gray steel tower. When they caught up with me, it could be a bit of an awkward encounter. But I wasn't going to call the police or anything. I thought about hanging around until they got a little closer, but decided against it. That was the first and only good decision I made that day, a decision that probably saved my life. If my companions made it to the top while I was still around, I would congratulate them on their bravery and ask them to paint one of the lights so the company could send me up here in a month or two. I reached the 200-foot mark and took another break under my thick beanie, feeling the cold, damp air on my cheeks. Although the company had told me to wear a helmet, I decided that at such a height I would rather have my cranium liquefied by the impact if it meant a quick and painless fall. I looked down again to see what was happening to my strange friend. It was close, because it took my brain a few seconds to recognize that whatever was climbing the tower toward me was not human. The distance between us had shrunk by several dozen feet, making it impossible to mistake us. Its arms were too long, its body too short. Through the fog, I caught glimpses of dark, glowing skin and a face twisted around a knobby neck. Two eyes as pale and milky as an old man's cataracts. I blinked. It was still there. One long arm swung over the other with unnatural grace, and the hand was large enough to curl around and swallow the entire steel frame. It was not superstition, religion, philosophy, politics, or anything else. I was climbing the tower with my monkey brain, and when I saw what followed me up the tower, my ape-like brain took over. My brain tried to explain what I was seeing. It was some kind of prank. It must be a TV show with a ridiculous budget. Multiple half-hearted attempts at rationalization went through my head. I searched for excuses and came up empty. Did I really just see that? I risked a glance down. The thing was still under me, rising and rising and rising. It climbed in eerie silence, not growling like a wild beast, but with the quiet, flowing determination of a predator stalking its prey. For a moment I could see the movement of an asinine face with a full set of black teeth on its naked skin. I had seen that kind of toothy, rotten smile before, when I had given an old druggie some coins. There was only one way down now. I abandoned my cautiousness and climbed as fast as I could, and the 300-foot mark was a blur. With every breath I took, my lungs grew hotter and I began to feel dizzy. My mouth tasted of copper and my eyes were blurry. I began to get clumsy. I stepped off my feet, almost falling. I clung to it, terrified of the sensation of long fingers wrapping around my feet. After kicking the ring once, I managed to get my boot back in place and kept going. When I reached the top floor of the tower, the trapdoor was padlocked. It was locked, of course. I tore off my gloves with my teeth and whirled them around, searching my pockets for a key. Nothing. My whole body trembled with fear. I removed the hammer from my belt and struck the padlock. The key hit my arm and opened. I pushed the door open and landed on the small platform at the top, like a trout rising from the creek. Through the grate, I could see what was directly below me. Cracking my jaw open, I opened my mouth to reveal a mouth that was too wide. Inside that mouth was another mouth. And another. And one more thing. I screamed. Well, it was all I could do with the air left in my lungs. It sounded like a moan or a sob. I stood with my back to the top of the tower, watching it move. I put one foot on the railing at the edge of the platform and checked the parachute straps. The sky was gray everywhere, nothing but an endless, mind-numbing gray. In hindsight, I feel like I should have at least had an idea where the sun was, but there was nothing, just an endless field of twilight. I didn't know which way I was facing, or where the meadow was where I had planned to land. I might as well have been diving blindly into the fog, not knowing where I was going or even how close I was to the earth. It was insane. Nevertheless, it was the only option. The creature lifted one glowing arm over the edge of the tower to grab me. I threw myself down. Normally, I would have squealed with delight here, intoxicated by the wind on my face and the feeling of weightlessness. The cold wind drenched my skin and hair, making me cry freezing tears. I had my goggles around my neck to protect my face, but forgot to put them on. I grabbed the ripcord and pulled as hard as I could. There was a reassuring snap of nylon, my gut loosened, and my legs kicked forward. Thankfully, instinct gave my overworked brain a break. With the wind whistling in my ears, I looked over my shoulder into the sky, but saw no creature overhead. I gripped the steering line and looked for any sign of the ground below. There was nothing. A few moments passed. Then I saw a tree sticking out of the fog. Branches slammed into my face and struck my limbs. I leaped out from between the trees and jumped straight into the side of the fence, the base of the tower. Razor wire sliced through my hands as I slammed into the top of the fence with enough force to knock the wind out of me. I fell back and landed on the dirt, shredded nylon blowing out to cover my face. I struggled to escape the wreckage of the chute and unbuckled my pack belt. I limped to the Jeep. I couldn't see the creature overhead. I opened the Jeep door and started the engine, hoping that the faulty spark plugs, which I had been meaning to replace for months, would be the last straw. The engine came to life. Something flew overhead. Long limbs spread wide, membranous wings trailing in the sky. The predator stared into my eyes as it glided silently overhead, banking. I backed the Jeep up, tires spinning in the loose dirt. Tires spun in the loose dirt. My head bounced off the headrest as I crashed through the gate. Then I started running, rocking along the gravel-lined road. I didn't stop driving until I reached home. The autopilot must have kicked and the ER must have thought I was crazy. I had to peel my fingers off the bloody steering wheel. It's been 2 weeks now, and the stitches on my arm and hand are still healing. The scars will stay with me for the rest of my life. I am writing this with the door locked and my father-in-law's old 12-gauge propped up against my desk. Maybe I should get a dog. The fog has returned and somehow the mountains don't seem as safe as they used to be. An email from work appears on my cell phone screen. Another job, another site. I don't think I'll reply.